Your silence insults them, your intelligence exposes them, and your presence makes their shallow world feel small. Now imagine this for a moment. Chosen one. You walk into a room and suddenly people shift. Conversations change, faces tighten. They can't quite explain it, but your energy feels like a mirror they never asked to look into. Not because you said something offensive, not because you disrespected anyone, but simply because you didn't water yourself down to make them feel smarter, safer, or superior. That quiet refusal, it speaks louder than any words you could say, and it pisses them off. Here's a hard truth. When you choose to stand tall in your truth, while others are busy pretending just to belong, you become the glitch in their matrix. Research even shows that people often mistrust or dislike those who are perceived as too competent or emotionally self-sufficient, especially in group settings. It threatens the fragile balance of artificial comfort they've built around themselves. They call you antisocial or too much, not because you lack connection, but because they lack depth. And thank you, chosen one. Don't forget to pay this message forward by simply pressing the like and subscribe button to help spread this message to more souls. It's the responsibility of all of us to protect the light and share it with those who are silently fighting in the shadows. And thank you again, chosen one, for being part of this mission. You are the part of a force that cannot be broken, cannot be boxed in, and will not be silenced. Now let's come back to the truth we all know, but rarely say out loud. Your refusal to dumb yourself down is costing you social points, and that's exactly how you know you're doing something right. The people around you aren't uncomfortable because you're rude, arrogant, or closed off. They're uncomfortable because you're real. You don't play their games, you don't talk just to be heard, and you don't pretend to like things you don't. And in a world that survives off shallow conversations and surface-level friendships, that kind of authenticity feels dangerous. But here's what they'll never admit to your face. Your presence forces them to confront their own emptiness. Every time you hold a boundary, speak truth with clarity, or say no to meaningless chatter, you remind them of the power they gave up just to fit in. And that is why they whisper, roll their eyes, or call you hard to connect with. Because the truth is, they've never even connected with themselves. You've probably noticed it your whole life. You walk into a group, and suddenly people start over-explaining, talking louder, or pretending to know more than they do. It's not confidence, it's a defense mechanism. They feel the presence of someone who knows themselves, and that's something they've spent years avoiding. So what do? They project, they mock, they distance themselves. But deep down, they watch, they study, and some even wish they had your strength. You're not difficult, you're just not programmable. They want you to laugh at jokes that aren't funny, agree with nonsense just to keep the peace, pretend like mediocrity is deep and shallow people have substance, but you can't fake it anymore. You've seen too much, felt too much, evolved too far. And that evolution comes at a cost: loneliness, alienation, and yes, even hatred. But it also comes with clarity, power, and freedom. Don't be fooled by their cold shoulders or side eyes. Behind closed doors, some of these same people are studying your words, imitating your ideas, or secretly respecting your discipline. They just can't say it out loud, because that would mean admitting they've built their identity around pleasing others while you've built yours around truth. So next time they call you too much, take it as confirmation. You're refusing to be small for their comfort, and that refusal isn't arrogance, it's self-respect. This world wasn't built for the ones who think deeply, feel deeply, and refuse to settle. But that doesn't mean you change. That doesn't mean you bend to be accepted by people who wouldn't even recognize your value if you served it to them on a gold platter. Let them be confused, let them talk, let them label you, because while they gossip in circles, you're out here moving in straight lines, focused, elevated, and chosen for more. And the truth is, nothing disturbs shallow water more than a deep soul stepping in. So keep stepping, chosen one. Don't shrink. Don't explain, don't dilute your light just so they can avoid facing their shadows. Because your refusal to dumb yourself down, that's the rebellion, that's the revolution. And that's exactly why the universe chose you. So, are you ready to peel back the layers and finally understand why your intelligence makes people so uncomfortable? Drop a comment below with number 777 if you're done pretending just to belong. And if this message hits home, consider showing love with a super thanks, because truth like this takes time, energy, and guts to speak out loud. Whether it's a scent or a blessing, it all fuels the mission to protect voices like yours. This isn't just a video, it's a mirror, a movement, and a reminder that your mind was never meant to be muted. And now, let's dive into this step by step. And believe me, if you're truly one of the chosen, something deep in your spirit will pull you to stay until the very end. Let's get into it. Number 1, they never wanted you to belong. They wanted you to bow down and behave. Your presence doesn't offend them. Your refusal to shrink does. You walk in as yourself, and they take it as an act of war. Let's call it what it really is, chosen one. They never hated you for being quiet. They never excluded you because you were too deep. They weren't uncomfortable because you were different. No, what truly rattled them was that you refused to become small enough to soothe their fragile sense of self. You refused to play dumb so they could feel clever. You refused to be predictable so they could feel powerful. That's not rejection, that's resentment masked as avoidance. Imagine a wolf walking into a room full of stray cats pretending to be lions. That's what it's like when you enter their space. Confident, clear-headed, and absolutely uninterested in performing. You don't need applause, you don't need validation, and worst of all, you don't need them. That independence, that inner clarity, that rattles people who are still looking for their worth in likes, in laughter, in approval. So when you show up and don't flinch, don't fake it, don't kneel, that's when the masks start to slide. That's when the smiles tighten. That's when they begin calling you things like intimidating, hard to read, or too much. But make no mistake, that's not a reflection of who you are. That's a cry of discomfort from people who've spent their lives building identities around being the loudest one in the room, until you walked in. You didn't dim your light, that's your crime. And the world around you? It doesn't reward those who shine too brightly without permission. It doesn't applaud those who step out of line and start asking real questions. No, this world punishes clarity. It punishes emotional intelligence. It punishes depth. Because in a society built on shallow conversations and surface-level masks, someone like you, who sees straight through it all, is seen as dangerous. They want you to fit in, but not as you. They want a version of you that's watered down, quieter, dumber. They want you smile at things you find offensive, nod at nonsense, and blend into a crowd that's never truly seen you. But you refused. You sat in silence when the conversation lacked substance. You questioned things they blindly accepted. You chose solitude over stupidity, and that made you the enemy. Ever noticed how they treat you differently when you speak up, when you question something, when you don't laugh along with the joke? That's not just social discomfort, that's ego panic. They're not mad at you. They're mad at what your presence reveals about them, that they've been faking it, that they've dumbed themselves down to fit in, and here you are, refusing to do the same. You remind them of everything they gave up just to be accepted. But let me ask you this, chosen one, is fitting in really worth it if it costs you your authenticity? Is temporary approval worth permanent self-betrayal? Of course not. That's why you don't blend. That's why you can't fake it. That's why you walk alone sometimes, because the path of the real is lonely, but it's powerful, it's clean, it's clear, and clarity is terrifying to those who live in fog. You weren't born to babysit egos. You weren't born to laugh at ignorance or dumb yourself down to survive small talk. That's not being humble. That's betrayal of your own brilliance. And no matter how they spin it, calling you too deep, too quiet, or hard to connect with is just code for "I can't manipulate you like the others." They want to shrink you because they can't match you, and when they can't rise to your level, they'll try to drag you to theirs. You see it all the time, mockery disguised as humor, exclusion masked as preference, side eyes cloaked as concern. It's never about who you are, it's about what they aren't and how your existence exposes that fact. But let's be brutally clear here. You are not here to be digestible. You are not a sugar-coated version of yourself meant to be easily swallowed by people choking on their own insecurities. You're not here to blend. You're here to stand out, not for attention, but for truth. Because chosen one, your refusal to dumb yourself down, that's not arrogance, that's sacred defiance, that's spiritual war paint. That's your boundary screaming, "I will not trade authenticity for access." You weren't meant to be small, you weren't meant to play it safe, and if your presence causes tension in rooms built on lies, then you're exactly where you need to be. Let them be uncomfortable, let them talk, let them misunderstand, because the more you stand in your truth, the more their lies will start to suffocate. You are the breath of fresh air they didn't ask for, but desperately need. And even if they can't admit it, some of them are watching you in silence, wishing they had the strength to do the same. But you can't shrink to make others grow. That's not growth, that's sacrifice, and you've sacrificed enough. Your energy, your voice, your intelligence, it's not a burden, it's a threat to systems built on false confidence and silent compliance. So don't you dare dilute yourself for people who can't handle your full volume. Don't play dumb just so someone else can feel smart. Don't laugh just to keep peace with those who profit off confusion. Because the moment you do, you're handing your power over to people who never earned it. You didn't come here to be quiet, you came here to be clear, and you didn't walk this path to be accepted. You walk it to be undeniable. So stay sharp, stay grounded, stay unshrinkable, because the ones who try to box you in will eventually choke on their own limitations. And when they look around and realize the one person they tried to mute is the only one who saw it all clearly from the start, it'll be too late. They should have listened when you were quiet, but they chose to get angry instead, and now they're just mad that they couldn't break you. Number 2, they flinch at your depth because they've been breathing shallow for too long. They don't hate your truth, they fear it, because once you show up, all the lies they've been hiding behind begin to collapse. Let's not sugarcoat it, chosen one. Their offense? It's not about you. It never was. It's a shield, a clumsy subconscious shield they throw up the moment they feel your energy coming. They say you're too much, too intense, or hard to read. But really, you're too real for the surface-level world they've spent their entire lives trying to survive in. Your depth doesn't offend them because it's aggressive. It offends them because it's undeniable. Imagine this. You walk into a room full of people floating on inflatable rafts in the shallow end of a spiritual pool. You, on the other hand, have been diving into the deep end your whole life, touching the floor, exploring the darkness, learning to breathe where others panic. So when you arrive, calm, still, whole, they get nervous. Your presence alone sends ripples across their manufactured peace, not because you said anything, not because you did anything, but because you exist in a way they haven't learned how to. Here's a quote to etch into your bones. Your silence isn't awkward, it's revealing. You don't need to speak to shake a room, you just have to be. And to people who rely on noise to distract themselves from their inner emptiness, your quiet depth feels like a personal attack. That's why their smiles stiffen when you speak truth without apology. That's why their jokes start to feel forced when you're around. They're not laughing because it's funny, they're laughing to maintain control. And when that control starts slipping, they start labeling. Suddenly you're too serious, too deep, or antisocial. But that's not an insult, chosen one. It's a confession. They're telling you, in not-so-subtle language, I can't meet you where you are, and I don't want to admit it. But here's the trap they fall into, pretending that your power is a problem. As if your ability to sit with truth makes you dangerous. As if your calmness is a red flag instead of a green light of self-mastery. They'll never say it out loud, but they envy your grounding. They crave your centeredness, and it makes them furious that they can't replicate it just by mimicking your stillness. You didn't say too much. You just said something they've spent years avoiding. Your refusal to gossip? That's offensive. Your disinterest in drama? Suspicious. Your ability to sit in silence? Intimidating. Why? Because all of it points to one thing. They've never built what you carry naturally. They've mastered social games. You've mastered yourself. And here's another truth bomb for the ones in the back. The universe didn't choose you to be relatable. It chose you to be real. So no, it's not your job to become easier to swallow. You weren't sent here to be comfortable. You weren't chosen to play small just to keep the peace. If your presence disrupts the room, then the room wasn't built for truth. It was built for performance, and that's why they start performing even harder when you walk in. Ever noticed how they'll overtalk when you're silent? How they'll fill every gap with nonsense just to avoid feeling exposed? That's not confidence, that's fear in a loud costume. And you're the spotlight. You reveal what they've covered in years of denial and noise. That's why they can't relax around you. That's why they side-eye your peace. That's why they keep trying to get a reaction out of you, because your stillness is louder than their chaos. Imagine being a mirror in a funhouse. Everyone else is reflecting warped versions of reality, bigger smiles, exaggerated egos, fake confidence. And then there's you, crystal clear, unfiltered, brutally honest. Of course they avoid you, of course they panic, because if they look into you for too long, they'll have to face themselves. And most people don't want truth. They want comfort. They want applause for mediocrity. They want noise to drown the void they refuse to face. But chosen one, don't you dare make yourself smaller to soothe someone else's discomfort with their own emptiness. If your depth makes them drown, they were never swimming, they were floating. You're not too deep, they're too used to shallow. And the reason they feel unstable around you isn't because you push them. It's because your stillness shows them how far they've drifted from themselves. You're the unspoken reminder of what they've ignored, their healing, their shadow work, their personal responsibility. You didn't come in with criticism, you came in with presence. And presence, real presence, is rare. It's disruptive, it's divine, it breaks down illusions without saying a word. They say they want real until real walks in and ruins the party. So the next time someone flinches at your truth, asks you why you're so quiet, or tries to label your calm as cold, remember this. They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting the version of themselves they see in your reflection. You're not the villain. You're the mirror. You're not creating tension. You're just refusing to play pretend. They're uncomfortable because you remind them of everything they've silenced, the depth they've buried, the truths they're too scared to face. And in that discomfort, they'll lash out. They'll label you, isolate you, dismiss you, but deep down, even they know you're not the problem. You're the answer they weren't ready for. So don't shrink, don't explain, don't mold your voice to fit their fragile egos. You weren't chosen to be palatable, you were chosen to be powerful. And if your power offends them, let it, because offense is a small price to pay for standing in truth. Keep walking in with your head high, chosen one. Let them choke on their own shallow air while you continue breathing deeply. Your depth is not a burden, it's your weapon. Your silence is not weakness, it's your proof. Your presence is not a threat, it's a reckoning. And remember, when the shallow get loud, it's because the deep have arrived. Number 3. They didn't want a friend, they wanted a leash. They didn't invite you in to understand you, they invited you in to domesticate you. Let's get brutally honest, chosen one. Some of the people who smiled at you, who acted like they wanted connection, were never trying to know the real you. They were trying to tame you. You weren't a friend to them. You were a wild energy they hoped to contain. And when they realized you couldn't be shaped, silenced, or softened, that's when the warmth started to vanish. Imagine this, a bird that sings too loud in a cage full of parrots trained to repeat. You weren't echoing their words. You were speaking from soul, from instinct, from insight, and they hated that. Not openly, not violently, but with subtle, calculated tactics, sarcastic jokes, fake concern, quiet attempts to humble you. They were never impressed by your clarity. They were intimidated by it. They thought if they kept you close, they could clip your wings quietly. Maybe you wouldn't notice. Maybe if they smiled enough, you'd never realize that their compliments came laced with envy, that their attention wasn't admiration, it was surveillance. And when you didn't play along, when you didn't shrink, didn't dumb down, didn't fake laugh or nod at nonsense, the shift was instant. Invitations disappeared, conversations got cold, and the label came fast. Too deep, too serious, hard to connect with. But here's the truth they won't say out loud. They never wanted you around. They wanted you contained. They couldn't digest the way your presence naturally rearranged the hierarchy they clung to. You didn't try to lead, but your clarity led the room. You didn't beg for approval, and that made them crave yours even more. But when they couldn't figure out how to manage you, how to box you in, they turned on you. Not out of hate, out of failure. Because you didn't fit their mold, you weren't programmable, and the script they wrote for you, you never auditioned for it. You didn't change. You just stopped apologizing. You stopped performing. And when they saw they couldn't change you, they walked away. Let them, because they were never your tribe. They were just trying to keep your fire on a leash, and flames like yours aren't meant to be managed. Number 4. You didn't outgrow them to hurt them. You outgrew them because you refused to rot with them. You became the mirror, not to shame them, but to show them who they really are without the mask. Let's make this clear, chosen one, your evolution didn't cause the shift. It revealed it. You didn't need to throw shade, clap back, or confront anyone. All you had to do was grow, quietly, naturally, authentically. And that alone disturbed the ones who stayed still for too long, because when someone like you starts moving forward, those who are stuck start to panic, not out of hate, but out of reflection. Imagine this, a garden where you keep growing taller, blooming wider, bearing fruit while others around you stay stunted. You don't talk about your roots, you don't brag about your progress, but just your existence reminds them they've stopped watering their own soil. And suddenly, your presence becomes offensive. Not because you said anything, but because you became something they no longer recognize. They don't hate your light. They hate the shadow it casts on everything they've left untouched within themselves. You didn't switch up. You simply stopped bending. You stopped laughing at empty conversations. You stopped over-explaining your boundaries. You stopped lowering your frequency to make other people feel more secure in their stagnation. And that's when the distance began, not because you isolated yourself, but because they couldn't stand what your clarity revealed. They say you changed, but let's tell the truth. They just never expected you to grow beyond their control. They liked you better when you were more accessible, more agreeable, more manageable, but that version of you was never the real you. It was a survival mask, a compromise, and when you finally took it off, they had to face the uncomfortable reality. You weren't like them. You were patient, not equal. You didn't leave them behind. They chose not to come with you. And the silence, the awkward tension, the weird looks and sudden distance, that's projection, that's resistance, because your growth makes them question their own decisions. It makes them realize they stayed in circles you outgrew long ago. And that realization hurts more than anything you could ever say to them directly. You didn't become their enemy. You became the mirror that reflected the truth they've been too scared to face. And that's why they avoid you. Not because you're unkind, not because you're arrogant, but because you became proof that it was possible to grow, and they didn't. Number 5, you weren't supposed to wake them up. You were supposed to stay asleep with them. They weren't offended by your truth. They were terrified by it, because the moment you spoke it, their carefully constructed comfort started to crack. You broke the code, chosen one, the unspoken code of spiritual conformity. You weren't supposed to show up with eyes wide open, soul intact, and a voice that didn't tremble in the face of false peace. You weren't supposed to question the silence. You weren't supposed to see, but you did. And now they don't know whether to run from you or follow you. Imagine this, a dim room where everyone's agreed to pretend the light switch doesn't exist. They've adjusted their eyes to the dark, decorated their corners with cozy lies, and made peace with the dust. Then you walk in and flip the switch. Not to be cruel, not to show off, but because you simply couldn't keep pretending the darkness was home, and suddenly the light is unbearable, not because it burns, but because it reveals. Your clarity didn't disrupt the peace, it exposed that there never was any to begin with. That's the betrayal they can't name. That's why the air shifts the second you speak. Because most people aren't in search of awakening, they're in search of anesthesia. They want just enough spirituality to feel good. Not enough to grow, just enough mindfulness to post quotes online, not enough to clean the rot in their souls. They don't want the real thing. They want a watered-down version of truth that doesn't touch the parts they've buried. But you brought the real stuff, unfiltered, undeniable, uncomfortable. You didn't come to win arguments, you came to break cycles. You didn't come to fit the vibe, you became the shift. And that alone makes you dangerous to a room built on denial. That's why they call you too serious. That's why they label you too much. Because in your presence, their masks stop fitting, their conversations fall flat. Their spiritual slogans sound empty. You've broken the illusion they all agreed to uphold, and even if they never admit it, they felt it the moment you walked in. You didn't kill the vibe, you revealed it was fake. They wanted you to nod along, keep it light, and smile through the shallowness. But you weren't built for spiritual sleepwalking. You came awake, and once you're awake, you don't go back. So let them whisper, let them avoid, let them misunderstand. Because you didn't come to join the slumber party, you came to sound the alarm. Number 6, they never wanted to know you, they wanted to cage you. They didn't invite you in to learn from you, they let you in to tame the threat you represented. Let's rip the mask off this one, chosen one. From the start, their invitation wasn't rooted in love, connection, or any kind of real respect. It was a strategy, a calculated move. You walked in with something rare, undiluted energy, sharp clarity, and unshakable self-worth. They saw it instantly, and it terrified them. But instead of rising to meet you, they smiled, opened the door, and began scheming how to shrink you quietly. They didn't want your mind. They wanted control over it. Imagine a wild lion walking into a room where everyone else has been trained to purr on command. You weren't roaring to prove anything, you were just existing in your full nature, and even that was too much. You didn't roar, but your presence alone made their fake confidence tremble. You didn't threaten them directly, but your existence called their bluff. So they did what insecure people always do when faced with real power. They tried to box it. They didn't ask questions to understand you. They asked questions to weaken you. Subtle jabs, little digs, passive-aggressive jokes, backhanded compliments that sounded like praise but felt like poison. Because in their world, anyone who refuses to play small becomes the villain. And when you didn't play along, when you didn't laugh just to be liked, didn't agree just to fit in, didn't soften just to survive, that's when the backlash started. They called you arrogant because you didn't self-deprecate for their comfort. They called you distant because you didn't give them unlimited access to your energy. They called you difficult because your boundaries refused to bend for manipulation. None of those labels were true. They were defense mechanisms, weak disguises for their discomfort, because what they really couldn't handle was the fact that you wouldn't be owned, you wouldn't be reshaped into something less threatening, and that made you dangerous in their eyes. You were never meant to be digestible, chosen one. You were meant to be whole, and when they realized you wouldn't trade your authenticity for a seat at their table, that's when the smiles turned to silence. The warmth became withdrawal. The truth became too much. They didn't want all of you. They wanted the version of you they could manage. But you stayed true, and in doing so, you showed them a truth they never wanted to face. You can't tame someone who was never meant to be caged. Number 7, you don't speak their language because you were never programmed by their system. They don't understand your words because they were trained to speak in code, and you speak in truth. Let's be real, chosen one. The way you speak, raw, direct, alive, it doesn't compute in a world that runs on rehearsed scripts and mental autopilot. You're not talking to impress. You're not using language as camouflage. You're wielding it like a sword. Your words aren't born from fear or social training. They come from depth, from alignment, from a place that most people haven't even visited in their inner world. And that's why your voice doesn't blend in. It cuts through the noise. They don't flinch because you're loud. They flinch because you're clear. You don't talk to fill silence. You speak when truth rises. You don't regurgitate what's trending or palatable. You pull ideas out of places that can't be Googled. You say what others won't even think, because their minds are still trying to stay safe inside the maze of cultural programming. But you've already burned the map. You speak from freedom, not fear, and they don't know how to process that. Imagine walking into a room where everyone's repeating the same lines over and over like a broken radio. That's the matrix. Shallow catchphrases, safe opinions, meme-level wisdom. But when you speak, it sounds like thunder in a soundproof room. That's why their faces freeze. That's why they blink like they missed something, because they did. They missed the whole point of the conversation, and your frequency made it obvious. You didn't lose your voice. You just stopped making it smaller for people who refuse to listen. You've probably felt the shift, that awkward silence after you say something real, that strange pause when you drop a truth too heavy for their comfort zones. But that silence, it's not rejection, it's shock. It's their nervous system scrambling to figure out how to respond to a language not built for flattery or conformity. They whisper about you, call you too intense, hard to follow, deep, But that's projection. That's their mind crashing into a reality it wasn't programmed to accept. You weren't trying to be different, you just couldn't pretend anymore. You couldn't keep watering down your expression to fit inside their fragile social frames. So you stopped, and when you did, the divide became permanent. You didn't outgrow the people, you outgrew the programming. And now your voice feels like resistance in rooms addicted to comfort. But don't silence it, don't fold, don't lower your tone to make others feel tall. Because the truth is, your voice was never meant to be understood by the programmed. It was meant to wake them up. Number 8. You're not too much. They're just not built for what you carry. You weren't born to dim your light. You just walked into a room full of people who never built the eyes to face it. Let's make it plain, chosen one. Every time someone tells you you're intimidating, what they're really saying is, I haven't done the inner work to stand beside someone like you without crumbling. It's not your intensity, it's their unreadiness. It's not that you're loud, it's that you're clear. It's not that you're arrogant, it's that they've mistaken self-awareness for ego because they've never seen it done without performance. You're not too much, they've just been living too small for too long. When you walk in fully awake, grounded, present, it sends shockwaves, not because you're forcing anything, but because your existence is pure contrast. You're the mirror they didn't ask for. Your energy vibrates on a frequency that exposes the silence in theirs. You don't try to impress, you don't beg for attention, and that alone makes them uncomfortable because they've tied their identity to applause. Imagine a lighthouse surrounded by dim bulbs pretending to glow. You're not trying to outshine anyone, but your light exists, and that's enough to make them flinch, because it highlights how much they've been faking strength, faking joy, faking clarity. They built confidence on compliments. You built yours in silence, in solitude, in fire. They can't match it, so they call it too much. But let's be clear, you're not a threat, you're just a reminder. A reminder that growth is possible, that presence is power, that truth doesn't need an audience. Most people haven't done the internal construction it takes to hold steady when someone shows up with soul depth. They're still patching up holes with attention, still outsourcing their worth to trends, still hoping that if they fake it long enough, no one will notice the emptiness underneath. But you already noticed. You've seen behind the performance, you've heard what's not being said, and you've outgrown the need to play along just to keep the peace. So when they throw shade, that's not your problem, that's their pain. You don't need to shrink, you don't need to soften, you don't need to translate your truth into a language that coddles their fragility, because you weren't sent to make people comfortable, you were sent to shake them awake. Number 9, you are the wake-up call they keep hitting snooze on. You didn't threaten their comfort, you revealed their potential, and that's what scared them. Here's the raw truth. Chosen one, you don't have to shout, preach, or persuade. Your very existence speaks. The way you walk, the way you choose peace over drama, growth over cycles, truth over image, that alone challenges everything they've built their lives around. You are an invitation, not loud, not forced, but undeniable. You're the proof that healing is possible, that change is real, that there's another way to live besides surviving on autopilot. But not everyone wants that kind of message, because the moment you walk in with alignment, with boundaries, with a clear mind and an open soul, you become a mirror they didn't ask for. They say they want growth, but what they really want is comfort dressed up as progress. And when you come around, showing them what actual evolution looks like, they feel the pull and immediately resist it. You didn't say they were asleep, but your presence reminded them they never woke up. It's not personal, even when it feels like it. Their judgment, their distance, their backhanded compliments, those aren't attacks on your character. They're defense mechanisms, because when someone like you walks in, whole, awake, real, it stirs the buried dreams they've tried to forget. You remind them they've played it safe for too long, that they've stayed in relationships, environments and mindsets far beneath their purpose. And instead of accepting that as motivation, they run. Imagine this. You offer someone a key to freedom and they slam the door because freedom means responsibility. That's what happens when you enter their space. You don't just show them what's possible, you remind them of what they've avoided. And that's terrifying for someone who has built their identity around excuses. So they label you too intense, too spiritual, too deep. But you're none of those things. You're just real. And realness doesn't need to shout, it just is. You are the invitation they begged the universe for, but weren't prepared to answer. So don't shrink, don't chase, don't try to convince them to see you clearly. If they walk away, let them. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting the part of themselves your energy dares to awaken. And one day, they'll look back and realize the very person they pushed away was the mirror they needed to face all along. Number 10. They wanted to stand in your light, but only if you stayed in their shadow. They clapped when you were dim because your brilliance still served them, but the moment you lit up the whole room, that's when the silence started speaking. Let's expose this for what it really was, chosen one. They didn't want you invisible, but they never wanted you seen, not in your full power, not standing tall in your truth. They were comfortable sipping from your wisdom as long as you kept pouring quietly. They loved borrowing your intuition, your insight, your energy, but only behind closed doors. The second you stepped into your own spotlight, the masks slipped. Suddenly, they weren't cheering anymore. They were watching, judging, retreating. You weren't too loud. They were too addicted to the sound of your silence. They praised you when you were accessible. They loved your emotional labor, your late-night pep talks, your ability to make their chaos make sense. You were the backbone of their strength. But the moment you stopped being the background character in their story and started telling your own, that's when it all changed. That's when they started calling you too confident, too full of yourself, or saying you changed. No, you didn't change. You just stopped letting them feast on your light while starving you of recognition. Imagine this. A group of people warming themselves by a fire they didn't build, acting like they brought the flame. Then the fire grows, becomes too big, too bright. Suddenly, they're backing away, because now it's obvious. They were only standing close to benefit, not to build. They never celebrated your growth because it made them confront their own stagnation. You were useful as long as you stayed silent, as long as you stayed humble in a way that meant invisible. They didn't mind your power, they minded your awareness of it, because the moment you owned it, the game changed. You weren't just the helper, the advisor, the support system. You were a force, and forces don't ask permission to shine. They were never clapping for you. They were clapping for the version of you that served them. And now that you've risen beyond that role, their silence is louder than ever. But don't mistake it for betrayal. It's just exposure. Your light didn't harm them. It simply revealed what was always there. They didn't love you. They loved what they could take from you. So let them stare. Let them whisper. Let them call you what they need to justify their retreat. Because you didn't switch up. You finally switched on. And so, chosen one, if you've ever wondered why the world feels allergic to your presence, now you know. It's not because you're too much, but because you refuse to be less. Your light doesn't fit in cages. Your clarity was never meant to be quiet. So let them fall away. Let them talk. You're not here to be understood by the crowd. You're here to awaken it. If this message spoke to your soul, drop 777 in the comments, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this truth. You're not alone, you're just set apart, and that's your power.